Welcome back to another edition of Straight Talk with Tracey. I'm Tracey Masella, and today's topic is one I think you're going to be very interested in. It is vaping and adolescence. I'm joined today by two wonderful guests, Officer Jeff Deek, who is the School Resource Officer at Sachs Middle School in New Canaan, Connecticut. He's been at Sachs Middle School for 4 years, a member of the New Canaan Police Department for 23 years. And Danique Lewis, who is the Director of Prevention at Positive Directions in Westport. Thank you both for joining me today. This is a big topic, so I want to dive right in. Just as a little background, the number of kids that are smoking actual cigarettes has gone down, but the Surgeon General has noted that the use of electronic cigarettes increased 900% between 2011 and 2015, which is when really the market exploded. Children as young as middle schoolers can be seen on the internet competing to produce the most interesting vapor clouds using their e-cigs or their vapes. And in 2018, e-cigarettes was a $5.5 billion business, with Juul, which is now a verb to Juul, but Juul is actually the name of the largest e-cigarette company. Juul alone holds 60% of the market. So this is a huge problem. E-cigarettes were initially intended to be a safe alternative for adults smoking. So they don't contain the more carcinogenic products like tar and carbon monoxide. But they're extremely dangerous for adolescents. The amount of nicotine in one pod is that of a whole pack of cigarettes. So immediately upon juuling, or vaping, most people can run the risk of becoming addicted. So let's start by showing people, I know that you've brought some with you, what do these devices look like?
Well, e-cigarettes come in various forms.
Right.
Some contain, well, let's break down what an e-cigarette is.
Right.
It has three different parts to it. It's got the battery source, the heating element, and the container or the canister that holds the e-juice. So what we found is that people are now putting THC oil in that vape juice.
Right, so
the
marijuana
e-juice.
oil.
That's right.
Right.
In there, and they could heat it up, and they could smoke it through the vaporizer.
Right.
So the difficult part for law enforcement is we're smelling the flavored e-juices instead of the actual burning of marijuana like we would in traditional marijuana smoking.
Right. So yes, so that's something to note, is that all these pods are flavored. Right, so one of the most common is Fruity Pebbles, right? So they smell like something you might eat, or mint or vanilla flavored, right? So it masks the smell of either the nicotine smell or the marijuana smell.
Correct. And then they come in different sizes and different shapes. Here's another one. This is more of a vape pen, so to speak. And here's your battery source, your heating element, as you can see right here, that heats up the e-juice, and you smoke. And the one that's been probably the most controversial and hardest to detect has been the Juul. You know, your typical parent would see this and say, wow, it looks like a flash drive. And in fact, it does look like the flash drive.
Yeah, I want to hold that up so everybody can see. It is about the size of my finger, and it looks just like a flash drive. In fact, you can actually charge this on your computer in your USB port, right?
I'm glad you said that, because here is the charging piece. The charging piece goes right in USB. It's a magnet. It attaches, and then it charges.
Yeah.
And on top of that, so here's the dangerous part. So this little container right here, this is your pod.
Yes.
So this little guy right here is equivalent to a pack of cigarettes or even more.
Right.
And this plugs right into the top. The person takes a drag or a draw, they exhale, and they start their vaping.
Their habit.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right. So what are you seeing in the school and in the programs that you're working with kids in the community? What's the reality? So we can give you I can give the statistics about how many kids are vaping, but what's the reality that you're seeing?
So kind of the reality, based on kind of peer groups, they're at least reporting, if not their own use, but saying that there are their own peers and friends that are using vapes, and that it's widespread. So I think that we probably hear it like everyone's doing it, and we know that it's not necessarily the majority, but that it has gotten to the point where we're seeing more of a response, especially kind of from the school side, of kind of what to do, and then really doing more around education with parents of kind of what to look for, especially this past year. It's been a lot more active.
Jeff, what are you seeing in the school?
So I think from the schools, and we discussed this earlier, oftentimes that rumor mill starts and everybody talks about everyone vaping, and that just has been my experience personally and in the schools. What we found is that there is a small pocket of kids that are certainly vaping, but the dangerous part about the whole vaping issue is that it's attracting a population that would never try smoking in the first place, because you could vape with something that smells like Fruity Pebbles or mint or strawberry. Still get the initial high that you would from nicotine, and then continue on without the bad smells or your teeth turning yellow or your skin.
Right, and there is the perception among kids that it is safe, that there are no downsides to juuling, vaping, using an e-cigarette.
Right.
In fact, it is safer than smoking, but the effect of that much nicotine on an adolescent brain is quite dangerous. In fact, we know that the health risks for an adolescent smoker smoking the same amount as an adult smoker is far greater. Lowering of IQ, impulse control issues, and also running the risk of having a lifetime addiction. The earlier that you're introduced to these substances, the more likely you will to have a lifetime habit of use. So. When you're talking to kids, are they saying that there's nothing wrong with vaping? Why is everybody getting so incensed about this?
Well,
No pun
it's
intended.
just vapor.
Right.
It's just water, and that I think that's kind of a very common myth that we're addressing with young people. Not only that, but all of the other pieces of what they could be ingesting, so metals, formaldehyde, that especially within the earlier versions of e-cigarettes, there aren't a lot of, there isn't a true regulated form of an e-cigarette, so kind of whatever you're getting is whatever you're getting, and that they don't necessarily understand the long-term effects of kind of what their use could actually lead to. So what we're seeing now is that when a young person is picking up an e-cigarette, over time, it could lead them to going back to traditional cigarettes. So even though we're seeing that this may be the generation that really ends tobacco smoking, that they may end up kind of later in life being able to kind of become more traditional cigarette smokers.
Right, yeah. And when you're talking to kids, what's the backlash? What's the pushback, I should say, about vaping?
Well, I think the interesting part about having an open conversation or dialogue with kids is the majority of these kids, and I mean this sincerely, from 6th grade on, knows exactly what a vape is. They know what a cigarette is. They know what an e-cigarette is. They certainly know what a Juul is. Some of them know the dangers of it, but still, it's exciting. It's new. It tastes good. And it's fun to do. You get to puff big clouds of smoke. And so that to them is intriguing and exciting. And so while I don't think there's tons of kids, like sometimes you hear, 50% of the school is vaping, I think those numbers are grossly exaggerated, especially in my school personally, where I'm saying.
In the communities that you guys work in. Speaking about the formaldehyde and trace amounts of metal like lead, Juul, the company Juul, is relatively strict and has a relatively small product line, right? They keep it very close, knowing that they are the largest company and also the most spied on, I guess you would say, by whatever governing body would cover cigarettes. They are owned by tobacco companies, by the way, so they are not independent of tobacco, big tobacco. So, but you can buy pods. There's companies that are not as regulated and not as strict as Juul that are making substitute pods that fit right into the same device as the Juul, but there's no regulation, and those are the ones that are actually, they're finding that really harmful stuff inside. Sure. How are kids getting this? I know there's a secondary market on eBay and Alibaba to get this, but how are kids getting a hold of these they're illegal for under 18 to either smoke cigarettes or buy an e-cigarette.
You know, I always find that to be such a funny question that people ask me, you know, well, you have to be 18 to get it. How do you get it? And I say, well, how do people get alcohol or drugs, right? If there's a demand, there's a supplier.
Yes.
So the interesting thing with some of these, especially the Juul, is that you could order them online. And it says, are you 18? And naturally, where it's all about honesty and divulging truth, you click on
Which
yes
is
or no.
high on the list of adolescent priorities.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes. Being the father of 3 boys, I certainly know this firsthand. And if it's linked to your parents' Amazon account,
Right.
it's real easy to get. Then throw into the true source is when you go into just about any convenience store, it's about dollars.
Yeah.
You go into any convenience store in Norwalk or Bridgeport or Stamford, they're going to sell it. They're going
Right.
to sell it to somebody that's under the age of 18
Right.
because they have to move the products.
That's right. Yeah. So that's one thing, not to jump ahead to what parents can do, but I do want to say that if it's linked to your Amazon account, parents should be checking their Amazon account. That's one way you can find out what the kids are buying, right?
Yes,
So if it's
sure.
anything that has that looks or sounds like an e-cigarette product, it probably is, right?
Right.
So, right. So, okay. So one of the things that I read about was that the e-cigarette companies aren't even having to do a lot of their own advertising, that the kids are doing the advertising for them. So it's become really sexy to get online and post videos about vaping. Are you finding that in looking at kids' social media accounts, or are they talking about that this is part of
I'm gonna let you talk, then I'll
the
answer that.
social world that they live in now?
I think that it's kind of created this subculture. You know, you can personalize your vape now, so you can get different skins, and that's appealing since they are so discreet. It makes young people feel like they're getting away with something. So I think that kind of is a piece to kind of why things are the way that they are. But I think that, you know, there are these kind of third-party marketers that are really looking at how do you attract more business. And I think that really through the personalization, we're seeing young people are bedazzling their Juuls
Oh my goodness.
now. You know,
Jeff, do you have one of those?
too?
Oh my!
Oh, fabulous. You know, but
Look
I
at
think
that.
was not planned.
Jeez.
But I think that since you can personalize it, you know, it's a way for a young person to also be able to express themselves. But it is something that I feel like we have only hit the tip of the iceberg on, and I think that as time will progress, it'll be something that we'll have to continually respond to.
Yeah. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk some more about vaping in our adolescence.
For 1 in 4 Americans, mental illness hits close to home. And since 1931, Silver Hill Hospital has also been close to home. For individuals and families facing the challenges of mental illness, Silver Hill offers a highly trained, compassionate staff that provides state-of-the-art care in a beautiful and private setting. If mental health issues hit close to home, remember, there's a world-class psychiatric hospital right in the neighborhood.
Welcome back to Straight Talk with Tracey. Today's topic is vaping and adolescence, and I am joined by 2 wonderful guests, Officer Jeff Deek and Danique Lewis, both who deal with adolescents on a regular basis and are seeing vaping, though not quite yet ubiquitous as people think. Everybody is not vaping. It is certainly a growing problem, and as you said, Danique, this is just the tip of the iceberg as it becomes more and more popular. Let's talk about, so we've talked about nicotine primarily, but as you mentioned, Jeff, prior to this, that you can put into some of these mechanisms marijuana oil.
Correct.
And I read also that the amount of marijuana that is vaped is higher than a normal marijuana smoked through traditional cigarette form.
That's correct.
And so kids are greening out is a term that I read, where they're actually getting nauseous and feeling sick from smoking marijuana, which looks like, if you look at it, a very small amount, right? But in actuality is pretty potent. So How, just anecdotally, are you seeing more kids using nicotine or more kids using pot?
Well, I think it depends on the different levels, like school levels.
Yeah.
So the nicotine primarily for us are certainly being shown as 7th and 8th graders, and that summer before freshman year is where we're seeing that spike in kids that are trying the really risky things,
Okay.
like your THC oils or your dabs in your vaporizers.
Right, which is the wax.
Right, which is
Yeah.
that wax. It's the marijuana that's boiled down
Right.
to like a dark earwax type substance. But the problem being, like you said, like you had mentioned, the THC levels in that are super concentrated, and the
Right.
kids just think they're smoking typical marijuana, and they're not.
Right. And there's no typical marijuana anymore? I mean,
There's not.
The marijuana of today is vastly different, certainly, than when I was growing up. That you had some security, if you will, about what was in your joint, right? And today, that's just not the case.
That is true.
So they're lacing even regular marijuana with all sorts of things to make it a different high. So do you think kids are smoking because of the risk or the allure of it, just to, why kids have smoked throughout the year, the iconic picture of James Dean, smoking with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth? Or do you think that it is helping them to manage an increase in anxiety, which we know is happening also with our adolescents? What's your thought on that?
I feel like it's kind of a mix. So I think that what we're really having young people respond to is just that since it is something that's prominent amongst their peer groups, it's something that you just do. It's not to say that we're not experiencing young people at early and earlier ages who are really expressing a lot of stress. But I think that probably from my side, it's more about, the availability. They have access through their friends, and it's something to do.
Okay. So boredom, right? And it's a socially connecting thing now to do. Yeah.
And I would absolutely agree with that, but I also think it's important to mention that for some of these kids, and if you go on YouTube, you can do those smoke rings and those vape rings, and it's exciting and it's fun. But not realizing, and some of the kids have told me that it brings down their anxiety level. It makes them chill out a little bit.
Right.
Not realizing that when they continually get that high or that nicotine rush during their developing brain, you run the risk of some type of addiction. You run the risk of addiction being higher. Throw into the mix, if you have addiction in your family, then that risk becomes that much higher.
Right. And it actually does short-term reduce anxiety, long-term increases anxiety, right? So your brain becomes dependent as an addiction on that means, that external means to calm itself down. And so it stays in an almost perpetual state of anxiety or looking out for threats. So long term, that's one of the dangers of introducing something like nicotine or marijuana into their system at an early age.
Sure.
So what are we doing as a community for prevention? What are you doing in your individual programs? And what can parents do? So that's a two-part question there. So what are we doing in the community to address what is a public health concern?
Well, what we've been rolling out, especially this past year, is really having opportunities for parents to get together and talk about issues related to their young person. So we just started an interactive bedroom simulation called Hidden in Plain Sight. So this is an opportunity for parents to kind of walk in a mock bedroom, shake the pillows, toss the mattress, be able to kind of look through and to see what they can find, and then to be able to have these dialogues around kind of what the emerging trends are, and then how to start kind of those conversations with their young person. So the biggest piece that we're really stressing is that you can talk as much as talking as much as possible is really helpful.
Yeah.
And that if you have concerns, to really raise them with your young person. And if these are kind of concerns that you're really seeing present with your young person, to kind of take a deep breath and to really keep the lines of communication open. So those are kind of the largest pieces. Anecdotally, I had a parent kind of respond to me. I had these like really huge vape posters kind of at a presentation a couple of months ago, and she called me up and she's like, I'd really love this poster. Can I have one? And I said, sure, but I mean, like, you could wrap a fridge with it.
Right.
This poster. So I said, sure, you can have it. So I ordered her one and got it to her. And she followed up and said, I put this in my mudroom. I posted it. Oh. And, it kind of put her kids on notice, just to know that as a parent, I'm aware of what's happening, but it was also a really good opportunity to start the conversations with her young people at home, which I thought was really awesome. But I think that really having kind of that ongoing discussion between parent and child is something that we're always stressing, regardless of what the substance is,
right.
And especially during those transitional points in adolescence.
Right. Middle school to high school being one of the key points, yeah.
And that's a difficult age, right? We all know that middle school is probably the most difficult age to grow up in, right? Your body's changing. You have the level of work is now going to a different level. So much more expectations are on you. And then you're introduced to all this stuff,
right.
Like your vapes, like your alcohol, like sexual stuff. And it's a lot for an adolescent brain to handle. So getting back to your question, what are we doing, or what am I doing? I do lots of pocket educations, and what I mean by that is small groups of parents, anywhere from 20 to 80 people, that want to come and have a conversation about some of the recent trends. Is this something that's rolled out district-wide? No, it's not.
Right.
But some people realize the importance of that, and to be able to give parents the tools, like you had said, to have that open conversation with your child is huge. It's important.
Are we educating our kids in school about the health risks of nicotine, as well as the other, alcohol and marijuana as well? As that
I know
bubbled
that
up to the top of, something that we're educating our kids about?
I know that Sachs Middle School specifically has rolled out something in their health classes that addresses vapes.
Vaping specifically,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right. Because
and within our curriculums, within the different communities that we see, we're seeing that. But then what we're also being asked to do at this great point is to do more professional development with teachers and other staff people as well. So I think that now it's kind of having that like multi-pronged approach or multi-pronged audience to address kind of these issues, and that it's not just education that we're providing for the student, separately for the parent, but then we're also doing something for the school community too, just to keep them up to task with what's happening.
Is the school allowed, I'm putting my parent hat on now, is the school allowed to punish the kids in any way if they're caught vaping on campus?
Yes.
What is the punishment? So
it's
parents
funny,
can be aware of.
And I answered
if they
this
get the
question
call.
to some parents that asked the question, well, who was vaping, who got caught, and what's their punishment? And I had said, kids have educational rights, right? So you need to worry about your own child. And they said, well, I want to know what this person got. I said, well, you're not going to know because it's none of your business, quite honestly.
Yes.
So I do know that several of the kids that have been caught with Juuls at the high school received 5-day suspension.
Okay.
So I know that things are being put out there.
Right. So
And
it's
discipline's
a
being
pretty serious offense to be
Sure it
caught
is.
smoking an e-cigarette or vaping on campus. It's not small potatoes, right? So
And it shouldn't be because there's huge dangers
right.
associated with e-cigarettes. And
That's
it's not just that cognitive piece.
Right.
It's the heart, the lung function. There's lots of other issues that we're seeing with this e-juice because it's not as regulated as you'd like to see it.
Exactly. And another concern is that the heating mechanisms can get very, very hot. And so if you're vaping in your bedroom, right, and you put it, and you hear mom coming down the hall and you put it under your pillow or under the sheets, it could actually, it's caused fires in houses. So,
Some of the kids have found other ways to get a more intense high, and it's called dripping. You're actually dripping the e-juice on the hot coils, and they're exposed to give it a more intense high and or burn.
Yeah. Lovely. So what would your advice be to parents if you see one of these devices or you see an empty pod or you suspect that your kid might be vaping or you see online, something posted on their Instagram of them with one of these fancy vapes? What would you suggest as educators and as parents yourselves, what's some of the advice that you would give?
I think the biggest piece is just take a deep breath and ask the question. So I can say that probably as a parent of younger kids. So hopefully I'll remember my own kids when they get a little bit bigger. But to ask them, and to have the appropriate timing for kind of when you have that conversation. So riding in the car is always a great opportunity, being able to find something relevant within the news to kind of bring something up. But I think that the biggest piece is really like if you see something that you really are responding to it. And then as parents, that we also need to recognize what our own resources are. So if we are having our young person be maybe be dealing with these kinds of issues, to know kind of where to go. So
Right.
really knowing kind of where the most appropriate referral place could be.
Which would be what? What are some of the resources available to parents and kids that want to learn more about this or potentially deal with an emerging addiction?
So I feel like the piece that I've been using, especially around this issue, has really been the Surgeon General guidelines. So they have the Parent Talk guide, as well as resources just about kind of what the myths and facts are around e-cigarettes and Juuls. Drugfree.org, the partnership, which is also, both talks to the prevention and intervention piece. And then also kind of here on a countywide, we have kind of a wealth of kind of resources, whether it be related to substance misuse or mental health. So really kind of knowing kind of what's available at our local level, but then also that there are these wonderful resources kind of on kind of more of the national level
Right.
that we would be able to access.
Right, right.
And some of the private levels. We've got some private organizations in town like New Canaan Cares that does a wonderful job of educating parents and giving them resources to deal with their kids if they're a little too deep into the addiction part of it.
Right, right.
But as getting back to your question, what do you do if you do find it? I think one of the things that we do as parents is if there's not an issue, we think everything's great. When we find that issue, then we go 100 miles an hour into it, right? And we have to educate ourselves.
Right.
So what we know and what we're telling you is that this is a trend that's coming and is the tip of the iceberg. Start to educate yourself on the dangers and the recognition of what these e-cigarettes are.
Right.
If you don't know what's in your kid's room or in your kid's backpack, do your due diligence and find out what it is.
Right, right, yeah. Yeah, because they're so small. And I actually have dealt with a few kids in my private practice that have decided to stop vaping and went through some pretty serious withdrawal symptoms and felt really, really horrible for a couple of days. So you might want to consult a medical professional if if your kid does want to stop vaping. That's just a public service announcement that I wanted to share because this kid was really feeling not well for quite a few days. So it can happen because you're withdrawing from a substance that your body is not used to. So, any final thoughts before we end our discussion for today, which has been so helpful?
No, I just think educate yourself, educate your kids. The kids are going to make decisions. The kids are going to make mistakes. We got to be there to pick them up, but we also got to be there to hold them accountable for their actions as well.
Right.
Well said.
Well, thank you both, Jeff and Danique, for coming in today and talking about this. I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot more about this in the coming weeks, months, and years, so I appreciate all the information that you provided for us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us today on Straight Talk with Tracey. We'll see you again soon.